All right, a fractured and divided nation watched as former President Trump was arraigned today. The first time, as we mentioned, a former president has been a criminal defendant in our nation's history. And as I've said many times, no one is above the law, but faith in our institutions remain paramount, and a two-tiered system of justice will only chip away at people's trust in our constitutional republic. Joining me now to discuss today's events and the political implications that we're looking at, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Tom, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to see you.
Hey, Tony. Good to be with you. Thank you.
So let me just start by getting your reaction to today's events.
Oh, I think it's a sad day for the country. It's also a dangerous development in the sense we're an undiscovered country. I don't know what the reaction is going to be. What is next in terms of this effort by the left to abuse and jail their political opponents. And it's not just Trump. We can go through pro-lifers, the January 6th defendants, others who are targeted by these operations, both at the federal, state, and local level, run by leftists and partisans. It's a Democrat-oriented effort to jail their political opponents. And, is it going to be retaliation by Republicans? Is it going to be a general disrespect for the rule of law and the fair administration, or a rejection of the idea that justice is being fairly administered, which would undermine our Republican ways that we probably can't even fathom now?
I mean, they've turned this president every which way but loose. I mean, I mentioned earlier 50 congressional investigations, impeached twice by a Democrat-led House. I mean, there's nothing this president hasn't done. Now, I think this was my take, and I said it at the beginning of the program, so I'm repeating myself for those that have been tuned in the entire time. But
I always quote myself, Tony. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if he would have governed the way he is alleged to have lived prior to being president, we wouldn't be having this discussion because the left would have loved him. But he governed as a conservative, and he put people around him, unlike any other Republican president in modern history, who actually advanced a conservative agenda. And he almost, had he had another 4 years, he would have dismantled the left's massive machine that we call the deep state.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of conservative public policy goals, President Trump was the most consequential president policy-wise in the modern era, and I include Reagan there. He accomplished more than Reagan did in 4 years.
Is that why he's a target?
Reagan had with 8.
Do you think that's why he's the target of the left, that they will not let him go? Because he not only represents, he represents a movement. It's not just a man.
And a rejection of the systems here, or the received wisdom that governs so much of Washington, D.C., that really infuriates Americans about the way D.C. operates. Trump sees through it all. He doesn't necessarily do everything he could do or could have done to confront it, but he did much more, as I said, than any other prior president. And, on the other hand, it's also about scaring folks like you and me, Tony, and every average day Americans and activists who are conservative, Republican, or frankly dissident liberals. They must fear, rightly so, their personal liberties at stake or at risk as a result of this, this authoritarian, this totalitarian instinct among the left to use the powers of prosecutorial government bodies to try to jail their opponents. It doesn't get any worse than that in terms of undermining a Republican form of government.
But could that backfire? I mean, we've seen that before. We saw that in the early 2000s when marriage amendments were moving across the country, and the legacy media was starting to become the opposition party and maligning those who believed that marriage was the union of a man and a woman. Of course, that's accelerated. But when the people had a chance to vote, they went in and overwhelmingly passed these amendments. The same thing in 2016 with Donald Trump. People who supported him were maligned, but they went in and they voted for him. Could this backfire on the left and cause and we're already seeing in the polls, a surge of support for Donald Trump?
Maybe, or it may be a distraction for him. He's going to have to watch every word as being potentially something that upsets the court. and you never know in a general election how this is going to play. It's going to be a close election no matter how you cut it. And I don't know how an indictment plays one way or the other. And you're also presuming the left ultimately wants to win elections. This is election rigging scheme. This is a rigged prosecution for a rigged election. So, this isn't ordinary in terms of our nation's history, where we've got this political back and forth. You have an entire movement who's rejecting the American way, the protection of law, equal protection of the law, respect for election systems and elections generally, to ensure that there's integrity and people can have confidence in it.
Right.
And the idea that, we don't use criminal law to just go after our political opponents just because they're our political opponents.
Right. That's what
Something
makes us.
that we used to, I'm not denying, we shouldn't be naive. It's happened before, but it hasn't been embraced before by the establishment the way it has been now.
Exactly. Tom, we're up against the break. Can you stick with us? I got a couple of technical questions. The district attorney requested a gag order, but it was denied by the judge. That would have been a significant issue. And you said he's got to watch what he says because it could still come down. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. So let me ask you a question, Tom. Folks want to get in touch with you. How can they keep up with Tom Fitton?
Well, we're all over the internet. JudicialWatch.org is our main website. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Rumble and Truth Social, everywhere.
Yeah, you are everywhere, that's for sure. All right, let me ask you about the district attorney requested a gag order, which the judge denied. I mean, wouldn't that have been, think about it. The president the former president is in a race for president. He's already declared a candidate. Would that not have been a violation of free speech as well as campaign intervention?
Oh, sure. Of course, that's what this whole process is about. So the DA thought the judge might bite, and the judge, did admonish Trump not to say anything that would cause violence, which of course isn't protected speech anyway. But he also, according to reports, had a little bit other, had another standard about upending the rule of law or hurting the process, that makes me think that it's, even though it was a suggestion, it's going to restrain or restrict his ability.
So there's a sword dangling above. There's a sword dangling above his head that if he says the wrong thing, his free speech could be shut off.
The sword of Damocles, and it highlights what Bragg is about. That he would again present this unprecedented indictment about nothing, and then use it as a justification to squelch the speech of the leading candidate for president, or one of two. It's just incredible. Bragg isn't running the country, and we have to remind him of that. Congress should remind him of that, and hopefully the courts in New York find some wisdom and discernment and shut this down as quickly as they can.
I want to just make one comment, kind of dovetailing with what you said. I do think that even though the left engages in this, we experienced it at the Family Research Council, where we had a gunman come into our building and shoot one of our people as a result of the Southern Poverty Law Center and their rhetoric. I think we need to be passionate. We need to be engaged. But I do think we've got to be very careful that we do not breach this line of inciting and calling for political violence against our political opponents. That's where we completely lose it as a country. And so I think that's one of those things we got to be very, very careful about. I
don't know any mainstream leader on the right who does that.
No.
Unfortunately, the left does that, embraces the violence. We're seeing the left-wing establishment rally around a woman who murdered a half dozen Christians.
Right. Yeah. Let me go to a legal question. Statute of limitations on these charges. What do you say to that?
Well, I'll warn you, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been following this closely enough to know he's on thin ice. Typically, the false records charges that are non-felonious or misdemeanors would have 2-year statute of limitations. And the question is whether the 5-year statute of limitations he seemingly is hidden behind by pretending they're felonies is enough to make it past the goal line. And I don't know if that's the case here. I mean, it just highlights the fact that we're questioning whether he's within the statute of limitations in this unprecedented style case just shows you how reckless these charges were. You know, it wasn't like Trump was out on video robbing a bank and, oh, we got to prosecute him. They're coming up with these charges that have been before them, the underlying facts, for a half a decade now.
Right.
And they charge him, 3 minutes after he announces his run for the presidency again. I know not literally 3 minutes, but practically speaking, 3 minutes. It tells you everything you need to know.
But the motivation.
This is an investigation or a prosecution that not only is designed to thwart the exercise of President Trump's First Amendment rights, but to thwart our right to govern ourselves by getting to pick our candidate without interference from Democrats in New York City who want to abuse their office to mess with our elections.
All right, final question for you, Tom Fitton. You have called for Congress to get involved. You know, we now have the Republicans in control of the House with, in particular, the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, but there are other committees. What does that look like to you, that a congressional action around this?
You figure out how much U.S. taxpayer money at the federal levels being used by Bragg and anyone else, and money, even if it's used in other circumstances, it's all fungible. So I would just think about it, this common phrase, defund New York, to the extent practical. If New York and the justice system up in New York wants to undermine our republic and use their systems, their justice system, to try to make a political prisoner out of Donald Trump, in the least, taxpayers should have nothing to do with it at the federal level. So that's the start. And the second part, obviously, is the involvement of federal officials in this jihad against Trump. And I suspect there's going to be something there to be found as well. So, Bragg should be brought to the Hill as quickly as possible.
Well, you mentioned federal involvement, federal officials. I mean, you're kind of the master of FOIA requests. I mean, is Judicial Watch looking into this?
Oh, yeah, we're launching FOIAs and already have here in Washington, D.C. We'll be following up under state law in New York. Alvin Bragg, to me, is acting like an insurrectionist. And so, we're going to investigate what we perceive to be his corrupt abuse of authority to target an innocent man. This is not a question about whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, or I don't like this policy or that tweet. This is a question is whether he deserves the equal protection of the law every other citizen deserves. And they don't think that because they don't like his politics.
Yeah.
We got to stand against that no matter your party and no matter your ideology.
Well, it's what makes our country different. It's important. Tom Fitton, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today. Appreciate all the work you do at Judicial Watch. You guys do great work.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate you as well. Thank you.